This is a Delphi philosophy video, the story of how Delphi, a young girl from ancient Athens, became a philosopher. And you can become a philosopher too. All you have to do is listen to the story, and when we get to a big question, try and think of a great answer. You can maybe pause the video and tell someone what you think, or tell them why, or ask them what they think. As long as you're using your brain and having fun, you can't do it wrong. So, let's get started. It was late afternoon in the city of Athens, and Delphi was at home, dancing. She raised her arms up into the air and leapt to her right, turned, kicked the air and bent down to her left, straightened up, sidestepped right, tripped over a rock and fell over. She usually liked dancing. Sometimes she danced at the festivals, but not today. Today she was bored. She wandered over to the small wooden box in the corner of her home's little courtyard, an outside space between the other rooms, and checked on her pet tortoise. She was sometimes worried that he needed more space, but Zeno always seemed happy enough. He was munching a piece of lettuce with great concentration. He had been 2 hours ago. "How do you do this all day?" she asked her tortoise, giving his shell a stroke. It was like trying to tickle a rock. The problem was that she had made up her mind not to get in any more trouble. Delphi's life had been nothing but trouble recently, ever since she had decided to become a philosopher and find a way to free Socrates. It felt like every decision she had made had been terrible. She had hurt people, she had got her friends into trouble, she had almost killed her father, and she had even survived an encounter with a god. If she couldn't trust herself to be a good person outside, then she was going to stay at home, out of the way, like the good girl she was trying to be. But it was so boring. Delphi picked up a rock and threw it at the opposite wall. It made a thunk noise and fell onto the stone cobbles with a clatter. She looked around for another rock. There wasn't one. What made her even more annoyed was the rumour about Socrates. Apparently he had taken his imprisonment and upcoming death rather cheerfully, and was said to be perfectly happy in his jail cell. Delphi ground her teeth together. Maybe he was just mad. She knew this was the life that most girls in Athens lived, just staying at home, doing jobs, but it would never make her happy. What do you think Delphi needs to be happy? What would you need? Delphi was just considering whether she was bored enough to start washing the clothes when there was a call from the front entrance to the house. Relieved she didn't have to start doing any work, she ran through the little corridor to the front gate. Standing under the archway at the front of her house was a stranger. He, at least it looked like a he, was wearing a large brown cloak which covered his face and body almost completely. He was tall and strong-looking. Delphi was a little bit afraid. "Yes, what do you want?" she asked, keeping her distance. "Builder." The voice was muffled and gravelly, like an animal trying to speak. "What?" "Builder. Can improve house. Make perfect room." The figure in the cloak was almost motionless. Delphi narrowed her eyes. "He should probably go away until my father gets home," she suggested. "No. Girl in charge of home. I build you perfect room. Anything you like, no cost." He seemed almost desperate. The gravelly voice had an accent that Delphi couldn't quite place. "You can build a perfect room and it won't cost anything," she laughed. "I'm not stupid, you know." The figure in the cloak stayed silent. "I would quite like a new bedroom, but I bet you couldn't do it. If I could have a perfect bedroom, I'd need a much bigger one for one thing," she started to think. "With its own bath, and lots of toys and clothes like they have in the market, and food so I wouldn't have to go to the kitchen, and a bigger box for my tortoise, and maybe a stage to dance on." The cloaked man seemed to nod. "Agreed. Finish tomorrow." Delphi laughed. "Fine. For no money, you've got a deal." "Yes." And with that, the stranger turned to leave. "Wait, you can't really do that," Delphi cried. "Don't be so stupid." But the stranger didn't stop or turn back, and was soon lost to sight as he wandered down the street. "What a weirdo," Delphi declared, and stomped back inside the house. She spent the rest of the afternoon trying to build a stage for herself out of wool and old wooden boxes, but there wasn't really enough space, or wool, or boxes, so she gave up. She spent the evening in her bedroom while her father spoke to a visitor in the men's quarters at the front of the house. Of course she wasn't allowed to join them. When her father finally came to check on her, she pretended to be asleep. She lay on her bed, looking at her tiny room. Her father was forever telling her to tidy it. As well as a small woolen mattress, there was a wooden fruit crate which she had turned upside down and used as a table. There was a small chest containing her clothes, all mixed up and in need of a wash. There was a pile of old toys in the corner, but some of the legs had snapped off the animals, and the straw was coming out her old doll. Even the door didn't fit the doorway properly and kept getting stuck. If only she could have her perfect bedroom. Think of all the things she would have then. She closed her eyes and tried to picture it as she drifted off to sleep. What would your perfect bedroom be like? Use your imagination. As soon as Delphi woke up, she could feel something was different. The air around her felt fresher somehow, like she had been sleeping outside. She groggily opened her eyes, blinked, rubbed them, and then gasped. Her bedroom had been transformed. It was huge, probably 3 times as big as the courtyard outside. In the corner was a steaming pool with a clay tile floor, and next to it were huge racks of clothes of every possible colour and style that Delphi had ever seen. She got out of bed and stepped towards them in amazement. She reached out and touched the cloth of one of the dresses. It felt silky and expensive. Against another wall were shelves bursting with food, every fruit she had ever seen and plenty that she hadn't. There was a small hill of honey cakes wrapped in papyrus, and there was even some meat which Delphi had only tasted once at a festival. She heard a rustle from the corner and looked to find an area cornered off with tiny wooden walls. Inside, Zeno the tortoise was treading slowly round the space, exploring the little pond and mountain of lettuce leaves in his new home. Delphi giggled in delight. "Is this just a good dream, Zeno?" she said, and turned back to look around some more. In the centre of the room was a raised area, a wooden stage like in the theatre, and Delphi leapt onto it and started to dance. She danced for longer than she ever had before, trying out every step and move she knew and making up more. She stopped for a couple of costume changes and tried on the bright pink dress and then the soldier's outfit. When she had finished dancing, she found a silver plate on the shelves near the food and piled it high with cake, fruit, meat and vegetables before taking the vegetables off again and putting on more cake instead. Every mouthful was delicious. She then tried having a bath. It was almost big enough to swim in. She splashed around happily for what felt like hours, squirting the water out her mouth and making as big waves as she could. The water never seemed to go cold either. She played with her new toys when she got out, hundreds of beautifully painted animals and soldiers, and she arranged them all on the stage in an enormous battle which the animals won. Then she danced some more, ate some more, and the hours ticked by without a care going through Delphi's head. Delphi was showing Zeno her collection of dresses when she heard the voice again. "You happy?" The stranger was standing in front of the door, which was one thing still the same about her room. His face was hidden under his enormous cloak. Delphi leapt up in surprise. "I didn't hear you come in," she gasped. She put Zeno back in his enclosure. "Couldn't you knock or something? What if I'd been in the bath?" "You happy?" he said again. "I can't believe you did all this. When did you do all this? You can't have done it all while I was asleep." Delphi took a breath so he could respond, but he didn't. He just stood and waited. "I do like it very much," she said. "I bet even the rich families don't have bedrooms like this." "It is perfect, yes?" the stranger asked. "You happy?" Has Delphi got everything she needs to be happy? Delphi thought for a few seconds. "Well, it is amazing, but I don't know if it's, perfect." "I build better room," the builder answered. "What, really? You can make it better than this?" Delphi asked, impressed. "Can build anything." "Anything?" Delphi's mind went into overdrive. She looked around her enormous bedroom and pictures started forming in her mind. Big, ridiculous pictures. "Well, if I could have anything, then—" She paused and the stranger seemed to be listening even more intently. "I'd like a place for my friends. Then they could live here with me. It can't be perfect with just me here. And there should be music so we could dance properly. So I'd want some really good musicians like they have at the festivals. And some more pets. The wooden animals are lovely, but I could have lots of real ones too, like ponies and baby elephants. And," she thought some more, "a whole field for Zeno so he thinks he's outside. And, oh—" She paused and looked again at the stranger. This might be pushing it, but he did say anything. "I'd want to be able to see the sky and the sun like outside. There could even be lots of fields to run around in and rivers to splash around in and lakes to swim in. But I know I'm just being silly now." She giggled and shrugged at the stranger. "Agreed. Finish tomorrow," he said. "Wait, were you agreeing that I was being silly? But there was no one there to talk to. The builder was nowhere to be seen. Where did he go? Delphi asked herself. She hadn't heard the door open. Oh well. She got into bed that night with a huge sense of excitement. Surely he couldn't do the things she had asked this time, could he? Some of them weren't even possible. Before she fell asleep, she realised she hadn't thought to go and tell her father about it all. She had been so excited it hadn't crossed her mind, so she promised herself that she would tomorrow. She closed her eyes and dreamed of fields, lakes, rivers, friends, and baby elephants. No, really, you can have anything. What would make you happy in your perfect bedroom? Can you ever be perfectly happy? Delphi, wake up! Someone was next to her bed, shaking her. It took her a few seconds before she realised it was Plato. What? She asked blearily. Why, you never told me about your new bedroom. It's awesome! Plato was looking around with genuine wonder on his broad face. Delphi stretched, sat up, looked around, and the same look of wonder came over her too. Some of the room was the same. She still had her stage, her bath, her shelves of food. The door was still there in the stone wall. But opposite it, the walls fell away completely, and beyond that, fields, hills, rivers, lakes. The landscape stretched out before them, green and impossible, under blue skies and warm sunlight. Fields of yellow and shimmers of reflected light on water shone like gold. In the distance, hordes of animals grazed on the grass. There a leopard, there a jaguar, and there her baby elephant. A cool breeze ruffled her hair, and it was as fresh as the sea. It was perfect. Is this really all my bedroom? She asked, getting up. She walked forward, Plato following, her bare feet nestling comfortably in the soft grass. She looked to her right and narrowed her eyes. Yes, it was there. It was hard to see, but it was. At the edge of a field was a wall in the distance as tall as mountains. The whole landscape was inside her room, under a ceiling that was as high as the sky. It was all hers. She heard laughter and looked to see a group of children leaping around in a nearby river, splashing through the water and pushing each other over. Come on, Delphi! Plato cried, and started to run towards them. Delphi grinned, and only stopping to grab a honey cake off the shelves, she ran after him. Halfway to the river, she was intercepted by a pony, an almost blindingly white creature who nuzzled her like it had known her for years. Of course it was a unicorn. She hadn't actually said she wanted a unicorn, but she had thought it quite loudly. Delphi climbed onto it and rode the rest of the way, galloping past Plato as she laughed with the sheer delight of it all. Delphi spent the rest of the day in paradise. She played with her friends and they went riding through the fields on unicorns, elephants, cheetahs and chariots. She gave Plato a pig to ride and almost laughed until she was sick. They swam in the lake and made friends with the mermaids who lived there. They persuaded the dragons to take them on a flight, and they swooped and soared through the blue skies, making Delphi giddy with excitement. They ate a lot of cake and put on a huge dance performance with dancing elephants and hundreds of musicians. She did remember to check on Zeno. His box was now almost a mile wide, and he was sitting in the middle of an enormous field of lettuces, looking rather overwhelmed. As the sun started to set, she rode her unicorn back to the bed part of her bedroom and flopped onto it gratefully. It had been quite a day. You happy? Delphi didn't feel surprised this time. The stranger was standing in front of her door again. Strangely, the breeze running through her hair didn't seem to affect his cloak at all. He was like a statue. But Delphi was far too excited to notice. Yes, definitely, she declared, standing up. I don't know who you are or how you've done it, but this is incredible. You want better room? He asked. What? No, this is perfect. A thought hit her then. Can't wait to show Dad. She edged past the cloaked man and pulled on the door handle. It stuck. It's always doing this, she laughed. Guess even you couldn't fix it. She pulled again, but it didn't move, not even slightly. Why can't I? She growled, pulling harder. Door locked. You no leave. Delphi released her grip and turned around slowly. What? Why you want to leave? It's perfect here in room. You happy here? His voice was cold and flat. But I just want to tell my dad about it. I'm coming back. She started pulling the handle again. Let me out. No. Do you mean I can't ever leave? Delphi asked, straining to pull the door open. It still hadn't moved at all. She gasped and let go. Her hands were stinging. No. But then I'm trapped. It's like I'm a prisoner. You have perfect life in room. I build anything else you like. You happy here. Delphi felt panic shoot through her. How did she keep getting herself into situations like this? But how can I be happy if I'm not free? Sorry, the door to your perfect bedroom is locked. Do you need to be free to be happy? Could you be happy in your perfect bedroom if you could never leave? The builder in the hooded cloak stood as still as a statue. Delphi desperately tried to think of something to say, some argument that she could make. But what about my friends? How can they go and see their families? Plato's got to go to school and stuff. No, they're here for you. They not leave, came the reply. You want I build families and school? No, they've got their own lives too, you know. She knew she was panicking. What about my dad? You want I build your dad? No, then he'd be trapped too, wouldn't he? Delphi bunched her fists in anger. You big jerk! Why does everyone think they can trick me? Without thinking, she lunged at the man in the cloak, aiming to punch him in the stomach. Her fist went straight through him like he was nothing more than mist. Delphi backed away, terrified. What are you? I make you happy. The figure seemed to be getting larger and darker. It suddenly didn't look much like a man at all. I built you perfect room. You happy here. You stay here. Delphi opened and closed her mouth a few times, and then turned and ran, back into the fields, into the growing darkness. She could hear her friends still playing down by the river, but she didn't want to go to them now. She even ignored the unicorn that came to find her again. It all suddenly felt hollow, like it didn't really count. Her bedroom was still just as wonderful, but she felt different. It didn't feel like her choice anymore. She wandered down to find Zeno again. It took quite a long time to find him in his enormous field. He had slowly made his way from the middle all the way to the edge and was staring at the small wooden fence that stopped him from going any further. Gently, he was touching the wall with his head. You want to get out, Zeno? She asked gently and picked him up. It won't do you any good, you know. See, beyond these walls, there's even bigger walls. She lifted him up, and the tortoise blinked uncertainly. We both live in a box. It's just that mine's bigger. She put Zeno down inside his walls, and then climbed in to sit next to him. What was she going to do? There must be some way she could trick him, some way she could get her freedom back. But what could she ask for that would make her free? What should Delphi ask for? Is there any way she can be free? Or is she already free? Delphi sat next to Zeno for a while, watching the fake sun set in the fake sky. She thought about freedom, and she thought about happiness, and then she thought of an idea. Builder, she demanded as she approached her bedroom door again. She put Zeno down next to her, who shrank back inside his shell. The reply came from behind her. You happy? It asked. She whipped around, her heart hammering. The dark-cloaked figure hung like a ghost. It wasn't even touching the ground now. No, she replied. My room isn't big enough. The Black Cloak looked almost surprised. You want bigger room? Yes, you can make anything, can't you? And you have to make anything I ask for. She really hoped this was going to work. Yes. Then I want a room that is everything. Everything that there was before you came to my house. My house, the city, all of Greece, the whole world, and everything else there is. She looked at him directly. Except you. The shadowy form let out a hiss like an angry snake. It grew blacker. It seemed to be thinking. You have to do it. That's the deal, she reminded him. You still not be free. The creature was angry now. Its voice was little more than a gasp. You still not leave. Even if I gone, and you still not free. Delphi smiled. Yes, but I've been thinking about that. That's always been true anyway, hasn't it? That's only one way of being free. I was never free to leave the world, or even leave the city, really. But I don't need that kind of freedom to be happy, do I? It's like Zeno. She looked down at her tortoise, who was looking up at her hungrily. He doesn't need an enormous field to be happy. He just needs what he needs. As long as he's free to do what he wants, then he's happy. You happy in room, the voice replied. You free in room. Delphi shook her head. I don't think it's free if someone else chooses for you. A new thought came to her. I wonder if that's why Socrates is happy in prison. If it's where he wants to be, then really he's free, isn't he? But I don't know why he'd want to be there. Delphi shook her head and looked back at the shadow hovering in front of her. Anyway, we had a deal. Do it. A room containing everything there was except you. Another hiss escaped from the cloak. Don't worry, Delphi said. I'll keep it tidy. The figure screamed. Delphi closed her eyes and covered her ears. It sounded like the world was being torn apart, which in a sense it was. She hoped the unicorn and the baby elephant would be okay. When she opened her eyes, she found herself back in her room, her old room. The tiny space with its second-hand furniture and broken toys had never looked so good. Oh, thank the gods, she muttered, and collapsed onto her bed. She wasn't at all sure if that was going to work. Actually, had it worked? She looked around. It looked like her house, and she could go through her bedroom door to the courtyard and outside. But were there walls at the edges of it all? She would never know. But she didn't need to either. She went to find Zeno, who was once again happily munching on his lettuce leaf inside his wooden box. She gave him a hug. He was better than a unicorn anyway. Sort of. Is Delphi free now? What does being free or happy really mean?